Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight, and thank you to our speaker, Meg Pencil, for joining us. My name is Serena. I am the current president of the Concord Wildlife Alliance. We are a local chapter here in Concord of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, which is a member of the National Wildlife Federation. So we are very excited. We protect, conserve, and restore wildlife and habitat in the greater Concord area. And if you are not in Concord, there are lots of chapters all around the state. But we would love for you to follow us on Facebook and attend our virtual meetings. And you can find those links down here at the bottom. Just to list a couple of our signature programs, if you're not familiar with us, we do a lot of things in our community, like for pollinators and for habitat. So those are things that we focus on a lot, but we also do other things like Kids in Nature Day, getting kids outside in nature, and we do Adopt a Stream twice a year, and lots of other things. So if you're interested in any of these signature programs, you can learn more about them on our website, which is concordwildlifealliance.com. And we have a tab for all of these, and you can find out more information and when it's happening in Concord. So this is our last program meeting before our summer hiatus. So we will see you in September after tonight. And maybe in person, maybe virtual. We'll just have to see how it goes. So it's really helpful if you keep up with us on Facebook that way, and you'll be one of the first people to find out. We do have some upcoming outings. Instead of, like, during the summer, we don't do our program meetings, but we still do lots of outings. So registration is full for next Saturday's Vulcan Quarry Tour. But if you want to get on the waiting list in case someone backs out, feel free to email us, and we will put you on the waiting list for that. And then next Tuesday, so a week from today, we're doing a virtual school garden tour. And so 2 of our local schools here in Concord are going to give us a tour of their school garden. And that really links in with our certifying wildlife habitat. And so we're all really excited to see what they have going on, as no one has really seen the school gardens in a year since COVID. So check out our Facebook or website, and you can get the link to register for the tour. And then on June 5th, we are going to take a tour at Hurley Park. I will be leading the tour. That's my day job. So back in May of 2020, I gave a virtual presentation about Hurley Park and some of the interesting things we have going on there. And if you are interested in coming to see the park and learning a little bit more, we'll be doing that on June the 5th from 9 to 11. There will be a sign up for that later on, and it'll be on our website and on our Facebook. So welcome to our speaker, Meg Pencil. She works at Sustain Charlotte, so we're excited that she's going to talk to us about Charlotte, what's going on in Charlotte, and how that can impact, or how we can impact their mission here in Concord. So just to introduce her, she received her PhD in marine sciences from the University of Austin and her bachelor's in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Connecticut. She educates, engages, and unites the community through Sustain Charlotte's programs and advocacy efforts. By ensuring achievement of project goals and pursuing grant opportunities, she supports Sustain Charlotte's existing programs and builds new ones. She shares outcomes of local government meetings through newsletters, social media, and blog posts, and provides opportunities for the public to provide input on decisions that impact their long-term quality of life. So thank you for joining us, Meg. I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, is everyone able to see that?
Yep, looks good.
Great. Okay. I will warn you, I've got a cat and 2 dogs that I brought into this room to try to keep them quiet during the presentation. So if you hear any tail thumping or weird groans, that's from my dogs. So what I want to do today is just briefly introduce who Sustain Charlotte is and share a little bit about why we take the approach of advocating for better land use and transportation choices to ensure a healthy environment, economy, and social equity for generations to come. So just to give a brief outline of what I'll go over, I'll just do a high-level review of the UN sustainability goals and talk about how the ways that we use our land and travel impact our quality of life and our environment. And then I'll just share some of the ways that Sustain Charlotte takes action and simple ways that that you all could consider taking action in your communities. So we are an organization that is based in Charlotte. We were founded back in 2010. Because the Charlotte region, not just the city of Charlotte, the whole region is growing very rapidly, as you'll see in this presentation. And we recognize that if we don't grow in a more coordinated and intentional way, that's going to have dramatic impacts, not for the better, on our quality of life and environment. So just to take the really high level view of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these goals were set to really ensure that development happens in a way that does not deprive future generations of what they need to be able to thrive. So I'm going to actually share evidence for how the growth in our region impacts many of these goals. So when we talk about access to opportunity, if we don't have a car, the cost of owning and maintaining a car could be the difference between poverty and getting out of poverty. We talk about hunger, whether a person has access to healthy food without the need to drive a car can impact whether they have food on the table or not. The ways that we travel around our community, whether we're stuck driving a car for an hour or two a day, or if we have access to ways to walk and ride a bicycle or walk to and from the bus stop, can really affect our mental and physical health. Whether we have free time in our day or whether we spend most of our day commuting and being at work can impact whether people have access to continuing education and the ability to help their children with their homework. We talk about gender equality. We're considering now, look at the huge gender equality issues that have been raised by the pandemic, when women have had to bear more of the responsibility for taking care of the family, as well as often having to leave the workforce. This is being exacerbated by lack of access to opportunities and often long commute times. We're going to talk about how growth is related to water quality and quantity. We'll talk about the transportation sector's impact on energy and how we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the ways that we travel. You'll see the connection between economic opportunity and transportation and land use. We talk about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The way that we build out our community really impacts what businesses can thrive in our community, as well as the workers who either stay in this area because they're attracted to the quality of life, or they come from outside the region and choose to live here. Reducing inequalities, we have some pretty stark racial and economic segregation that has been exacerbated by inequities in the built environment. Sustainable cities and communities. So what I really want to focus on today is sustainability is not just an issue for big cities like Charlotte. It is also an issue that needs to be considered in Cabarrus County. You all are growing at a very rapid rate, and so you have an opportunity to avoid some of the mistakes that Charlotte has made. Responsible consumption and production. We think about how we produce and use the energy, especially for transportation and building. We can build our communities in a more sustainable way that makes better use of existing resources. Climate action is really essential. We consider that we literally burn fuel to travel around in cars, and we use more fuel if we have to travel larger distances because we're spread out. The fourth goal is really about marine systems, so we won't talk so much about that, but we do recognize that there are impacts on our creeks and rivers from the ways that we grow and travel. Life on land, I'm sure this is really critical for all of you. We're going to talk a bit about habitat fragmentation and how we can reduce that by growing in a smarter way. And all of these goals really support more just institutions and communities. And of course, at the heart of all of this working together is partnerships like us having a conversation together tonight. So what I want to do first is just show you quickly a series of 3 maps that were presented or created by the Center for Applied GIS Science at UNC Charlotte. And they show how our land use in the region has really changed over time. So you can see the white star there is the center city of Charlotte, and Cabarrus County is up here. And if you look at the legend, you see that 95% of the land in the region was forest and farmland back in 1976. There was very, very little developed land, only 3% of land across the entire region, and that was really centered around Charlotte, was developed back in 1976. And the population was just over 1 million people. So if you get in our time machines and go forward to 2006, it's a very different picture. Look at how much more developed land there is across the region. And especially we're seeing it in Mecklenburg County, but also in Cabarrus County. There's a huge increase in the amount of sprawl that was happening. This is really the pattern that we see spatially on this map over time is sprawl. It's an increase in that human footprint, which is the amount of developed land per person over time. So we went from 3% developed land in 1976 to 24% developed land by 2006. But the population over that time period didn't even double for the region. So this is the very visual definition of sprawl. And this is a representation of what, or a prediction of what the region could look like by 2030 if we continue to develop as we have without any type of intervention or planning. So this definitely raises some questions as we consider our quality of life and the health of our environment. Between 2010 and 2019, according to US Census data, there was a 21.5% population increase in Cabarrus County. So this really raises questions like, where will all of these people live? How will they travel? Will we have access to our daily needs like jobs, education, parks, and healthy food? What will the air quality be like? What will the stream and river quality be like? Will we have enough water to meet our residential and industrial and commercial needs and wildlife needs? Will we still have healthy forests and natural habitat? So you can see a lot of those UN sustainability goals are really reflected in these questions. These are the questions that we ask ourselves every day at Sustain Charlotte, and we try to answer them in a holistic way by addressing land use and transportation issues. So I first want to talk just briefly about economy and equity. We're mostly going to focus on environment, but I do want to bring in the economic and equity issues based on growth. So there's a really interesting tool called the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, and you can look this up. I'd be happy to share the link with you, but you can enter any county or municipality in the United States, and it will tell you for the median income households, so the house, 50% of households earn more than this, 50% earn less. For that median income household, how much are they spending on transportation and housing, the 2 biggest expenses? So the median income household in Cabarrus County spends 26% of their income on transportation and 27% on housing. And this is really interesting because in the city of Charlotte, it's actually 29% on housing and 22% on transportation. So what we see is the housing is slightly less expensive in Cabarrus County, but y'all are spending significantly more than we are in Charlotte on transportation. So you don't have, even though the transportation choices in Charlotte aren't great, you all have even less access to affordable, fast, efficient transportation sources than we do in Charlotte. And so you add those 2 numbers together, that's 53%, if I'm doing my math right. 53% of the median income households' income is being spent on just those 2 basic expenses, those needs that we all have to have shelter and have a way to get around. And that's concerning because the recommendation for affordability is that households shouldn't be spending more than 45% of their income on housing and transportation. And what you can see on this map, this is from that Housing and Transportation Affordability Index. The darker blue the color, the more cost burdened you're likely to be if you need to live in that area. So the good news here is that there's I would say less geographic difference across Cabarrus County compared to Charlotte. Charlotte has a very pronounced geographic pattern of lack of affordability in the southern kind of wedge of South Charlotte. but there, definitely areas of Concord that are likely to become unaffordable and are already unaffordable for many people. So the reason this is all important is the single strongest predictor of whether a family escapes poverty. Just think about what that might be for a moment, and I'll show you the answer. Single strongest predictor of whether a family escapes poverty is actually commute time. For a household that doesn't have a car in Charlotte, and we don't unfortunately have the data for Cabarrus County, but it's likely even longer. For a household that commutes by public transit in Charlotte, on average, the commuter is spending 90 minutes one way if they have to change buses. So that's 3 hours a day on average just spent getting to and from work. So we think about, gender equity, and we think about advancing our education, helping our kids with our homework. If we think about having time to cook healthy food, commute time has a huge impact on quality of life. So we know that transportation choices are not as available as they need to be, and it's often very expensive to own a car. So we need better transportation choices. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about environmental challenges of sprawl being so spread out. We know that loss of tree canopy is a very direct result of sprawl. So as we build outwards, we lose tree canopy. And what that does in terms of habitat is it creates fragmentation. So this is just obviously, if you all have probably talked about fragmentation before, but this is an extremely simplified version of it. But there are species, of course, along a continuum that thrive in interior habitat, and they need often large areas of unfragmented habitat. And then there are some species that thrive more on the edges of habitat. So as we build out communities, as we sprawl more, we get more fragmentation of habitat. And that may be a good thing for some species. There are some species that really thrive in our suburban and urban backyards, and it's fantastic that we're supporting them. We need to support them. But then there are species that really need large, unfragmented areas of habitat to thrive. So we want to really think about how we grow as a community is really going to impact what species are able to thrive in our communities. We also know that polluted creeks are a side effect of the way that we build outwards and pave over surfaces. So what you're seeing on the left is just, again, a dramatic simplification. When the precipitation falls, if it falls on an undeveloped site, the tree canopy and the vegetation intercepts a lot of that precipitation, so it slows the rate and the amount of surface runoff. But the more paved surface we have, the faster and the larger the amount of surface runoff into our creeks and streams. So that not only carries pollutants into the creeks, it also physically erodes the banks of the creek as the physical force of the water rushes through. We also have concerns with air pollution, and the main pollutant of concern in our area is ground level ozone. So it forms in the presence of sunlight from primarily tailpipe emissions of vehicles in our region. So this is data from Mecklenburg County. I don't know if there was a similar study done in Cabarrus County, but because y'all are so close, it's likely that something similar happened. They were really asking the question, how did air quality change, if at all, during the stay-at-home period that we had last spring? And they saw almost 50% decreases in vehicle counts on I-277, 74, and I-77 during the stay-at-home period. Question is, does that translate into better air quality? And these were ozone concentrations at Garinger High School in West Charlotte. And what they found was that even taking into account the meteorologically predicted values for 2020, there was significantly cleaner air measured in terms of ozone concentrations in 2020, even after accounting for the meteorologically predicted values. So that orange bar there is the standard for human health for ozone. So we had much cleaner air in 2020. We actually had no days that weren't good or moderate for air quality for the first time in a very long time. And so what this shows us is that if we don't drive as much, we will have cleaner air. And obviously, as people are getting back to work, they're driving more. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward on this. looking at that question of having a healthy climate, we have obviously the local air quality issue that impacts human health and the health of wildlife. We also have the global issue of carbon emissions. So in North Carolina, transportation accounts for 32.5% of greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector. So we have a significant impact on the global climate based on the ways that we travel. So what we want to shift to now is just thinking about what if we really valued sustainable forms of transportation as a form of freedom, freedom from damaging the environment, and also freedom for ourselves to enjoy better health and access to opportunity without the burden of owning a car, if a car was an option instead of a necessity. So the approach that we take at Sustain Charlotte is smart growth, which is really, it's an approach to development that encourages a mix of building types and uses, diverse housing and transportation options, and development within existing neighborhoods instead of sprawling into undeveloped areas that consume habitat. And at the core of that is a strong focus on community engagement. And so this obviously is going to look very different in a suburban or a rural area, as you have a lot of that area in Cabarrus County compared to Charlotte. But there are certain characteristics in common, which is having more of those daily needs within walking, biking, or public transit access instead of having to get into your car to do everything. And so I just want to show you again the sustainable development goals. I'm not going to go through them all, but hopefully I've touched on most of these and talked about how transportation and land use affects our ability to support these goals. And so finally, just want to close with a few ways that we at Sustain Charlotte and that you all can advocate for a healthier environment by advocating for transportation choices and smart growth. So one of the things that we do is we advocate for convenient and affordable transportation. So, the CK Rider transit system is doing a great job of moving people around Cabarrus County and connecting with Mecklenburg County and really being part of that regional conversation about what does it look like to actually have the transit systems across the Charlotte region working together to form a transit network instead of each county kind of doing its own thing and hoping that everything matches up at the county borders, which is kind of what happened in the past. We also have launched a regional transportation coalition. This is not limited to the city of Charlotte or Mecklenburg County. We are bringing together grassroots groups from across the region to help advocate for sustainable and equitable transportation choices. So we'd love for you to check out that website, connectourregion.org, and feel free to get in touch with me. There's also info on the website if you want to get involved in that. We also think it's really important to support bike and micromobility infrastructure. So say micromobility, that's all the others kind of small scale, human scale ways that we get around, like the scooters are becoming really popular here. But our streets are our largest shared public space. We add up all the public space by square footage. Streets are the largest shared public space, but almost all of the space on them is given, we give priority to people in cars with very little space for walking, biking, and public transit. So we do a lot of advocacy for protected bike lanes so that people of all ages and abilities can safely and comfortably ride a bicycle without feeling like they need to be a road warrior. We also advocate for pedestrian infrastructure. Again, this is going to look very different in a suburban or rural area, but everybody should be able to use our streets safely and with dignity. Another thing you can do is organize a mobility audit. And I know we're still in tax season this year, but hopefully that word audit isn't too scary. But you can check out the project that we did at sustainCharlotte.org/walk-to-transit. This is a great way to get your group together or a group of residents in your neighborhood together. And there's a very simple walkability audit tool, which is just it's basically a Word document that you can print out and customize for your area with the questions that you want to ask. And you literally walk with your group of friends or neighbors, and you make observations about how easy or how difficult it is to navigate your neighborhood as a pedestrian. You can then share those results with your local transportation planners or your town council and let them know what conditions you're experiencing as a pedestrian and that you want to see some improvements so that more people can walk and ride bikes and ride public transit and start to reduce that reliance on driving everywhere. We also host events to celebrate walking, bicycling, and transit. These can be large, a few hundred people, or you could organize something in your own community. You could organize a walk or bike to school event with the kids in your neighborhood. You could do something small scale to introduce people to riding a bike to get to some local businesses instead of driving. If you've ever ridden the bus before, you could do a little outing to introduce colleagues to how to ride the bus to work or to certain destinations if that's a possibility for you. So this image is actually from an event that we host every fall. We had to do it virtually last year, but we're going to do it in person this October, called Biketoberfest, and it's in Uptown in South End Charlotte. You can see there we're riding on a protected bike lane demonstration. This protected bike lane is actually now under construction to become a permanent protected bike lane. But we actually have a quiz question for you, and the winner will receive 2 tickets to Biketoberfest, which will be some weekend in October once we know the Panthers schedule, but it's always a really fun event. You can bring your family out too. So I think I can't actually see you, so somebody else will have to either monitor the chat for the answer or call on someone. But what percentage of household income, and this is for the median income household, is spent on housing and transportation in Cabarrus County? Do we have any guesses? Or does anyone remember?
Hang on, don't go yet. I'm thinking. I'm trying to make an educated guess.
Okay. You could type your answer in the chat or however you all want to do this. And if somebody gets the exact one, we'll go with that. Or if no one gets the exact number, we'll go with whoever is closest.
I think we've got a few more people typing in the chat.
Okay.
We have a 56, we have a 60%, I said 45%, and then looks like someone else is popping one in. Someone said 53%. We have another 53%.
Okay. Whoever said 53% first is our winner.
Oh, that would be Serena.
All right. Congratulations, Serena. So the reason you remembered that 45% is that's the recommended maximum limit for affordability. So a household shouldn't have to spend more than 45% of income on housing and transportation. So that's why you remember that number.
53%. That's just crazy.
It is for sure. So would love for you all to learn more about what we do, and feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions or comments. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So happy to continue the conversation.
Does anyone
have
happy to take questions?
I know we were speaking about this at the beginning with the bike lanes, and that there's some people in support of them and some that are kind of pushing back. Can you speak to what are some of the challenges of your job and kind of how you handle that as you're working to increase the transportation through biking and walking and everything like that?
Sure. I mean, I think the financial side of advocacy is always an issue. Protected bike lanes can be built in a way that is either expensive or is pretty inexpensive depending on what area they're being placed. So they need to be built safely enough to really make people feel safe and be safe. So the Uptown cycle track, as it's called, actually requires quite a bit of signal improvement and a lot of concrete on the ground. So that's a pretty expensive project. There are other areas, there are other parts of Uptown though that have lower traffic volumes where basically it's just a painted stripe and then some simple vertical plastic barrier. So that's a lot less expensive. So there's definitely the financial challenge. I would say though, what is most challenging is overcoming the lack of inertia, the just overcoming the auto-dominated culture that we live in, where We hear a lot of, well, you know, Charlotte and the whole region is just, we're a car oriented society. That's not going to change. Don't slow my commute down by even 20 seconds by giving space to pedestrians and cyclists. So I think the most challenging thing is to really overcome that perception that the roads are just for people in cars. But, you know, about 25 to 30% of our population doesn't drive. So that's, and that doesn't even include children. That's, you know, older adults who may not be able to drive anymore. That's people who can't afford a car or choose not to drive. A lot of younger people, especially under 30, don't want to have to drive. One of the strongest factors that drives where young college graduates are choosing to live is that they don't want to have to drive. They might want to have a car, but they don't want to have to drive it to and from work every day. So I think we really need to think outside the box and, you know, what is it that's going to attract and retain talent in our region, and what is also going to give people that already live here access to a great quality of life. So we need to be asking those bigger questions when people just say, well, I don't want any changes to my street.
Go ahead.
I think there's communities that are being built that have the community around and maybe more in the center or in the same general area, the shopping that can be walked to easily. I've seen some of this happening a little bit, but I think it's a great idea. In fact, I would even consider living in something like that, and I'm kind of a country girl. But is that, you know, those kind of areas seem to be can be fairly small and set up nicely. What do you think of that as a growth pattern?
I think that's an excellent growth strategy, especially in a suburban or rural area. You know, it's not about having to build, you know, 4 and 5 story apartments and everyone has to live in those. There's a way that suburban growth can happen in a very sustainable way. And what you're describing is what's called sometimes a 10-minute neighborhood or a 15-minute neighborhood, which means that instead of just having vast acres and acres of single family homes, we might still have those single family homes, but in those areas, we also have walkable grocery stores. We have a drugstore. We might have the schools located within walking distance instead of putting the schools wherever the land is cheapest and having to put all the kids on buses to get there because it's not safe to cross the highway walking or biking. So I think there is definitely a great way to do that suburban growth in a more sustainable way, where you're not going to be as reliant on a car. We also want to think about, what does it mean to have a community that works for people of all ages and abilities? A lot of older adults want to be able to remain in their homes as they may lose the ability to drive. So if you're just surrounded by acres and acres of single family homes, you're going to be reliant on Uber or Lyft or getting rides from friends to get to all of your usual daily destinations. But if you live in a community that has those grocery stores and restaurants and doctor's offices within walking distance or biking distance, and there's a safe way to do that doesn't, you know, put you right on the street with cars, you're much more likely to enjoy an active quality of life throughout your entire lifespan.
Serena had a question. Are there any other large-scale programs that Sustain Charlotte focuses on? I'm sorry if I missed that in the beginning.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, we try to really adapt to the changes that are happening across the region so that we can get involved and support efforts to build in a more sustainable way, invest in transportation choices. I think one of the most important efforts that we've been involved in lately is a process called Connect Beyond. And this is being coordinated by the Central Carolina Regional Council that was formerly called the Central Carolina Council of Governments. And what it is it's really an effort to plan the public transit system across the region in North Carolina. So it's looking at making sure that we can get from one side of the region to the other without needing a car. So it's a really exciting effort, and Cabarrus County is a part of that. We know that growth and transportation planning can't end at county lines. It needs to happen in a coordinated way so that people can seamlessly travel throughout the region. So I think that's a really interesting effort. And you could request a presentation from them. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk with y'all.
Someone asked if you could speak about the trolley in Charlotte downtown, the hard rails. Is it being used, and was it a good use of the roadway?
Oh, so the streetcar. Okay, so the streetcar phase 2, they're currently doing, my understanding is CATS is still currently doing some testing. So it's a little bit behind schedule. I think it was supposed to have opened at the end of April. There was a delay because the engineers, the company that was building it ordered the wrong size of the girders for the bridge. So there's been some delays. I think it is in general a worthwhile project because it provides a critical east to west connection for the rail system. We would really like to see the streetcar run in its own right of way. So right now, it's a streetcar, it runs on the street, it has to stop at traffic lights. So it doesn't have the benefit that the light rail does. The light rail gets to zoom through, it doesn't have to stop at lights. The lights are prioritized to allow the light rail to travel freely. So we would like to see that same benefit conferred to the streetcar. And the reason I say that is we think about what does it mean to have equity on our streets, and shouldn't a vehicle that is full of dozens of people have some priority over 10 cars that each have one driver in the car? We really ask that question about how can we most equitably use our street space to meet the mobility needs of residents. So that's the way we choose to look at that. But I think it's also really critical to remember that in any rapidly growing area, the bus system is always going to serve more people than the rail system. So the rail is the light rail and the streetcar. The bus often doesn't get a lot of attention, but the bus carries most of the daily passengers. And we have a lot of challenges right now because as traffic congestion has increased, the travel times by bus have increased because the buses are getting stuck in traffic. So now CATS is preparing to do a study to figure out how to speed those buses up and where might we be able to try out some bus and bike lanes. There's currently one on 4th Street in Uptown that's working really well. But as CATS starts to look across the city, we know that there's going to be some pushback from people that want all the lanes to be only for cars.
And then we have a question that says, how are the developers financially invested in the sustainability goal? That's a good one.
That is a good question. So I think it depends on whether is the developer really committed to improving quality of life? Are they working long-term in Charlotte? What is their model for making a profit? And of course, developers have to make a profit. So they can do that by providing great amenities and vibrant public spaces as part of their development. In Charlotte, I know that whenever a parcel of land is redeveloped or developed, one of the requirements is that the developer has to improve the sidewalks if they're not currently up to the city standards. We have a lot of sidewalks that are only like 4 or 5 feet wide. And so whenever a parcel is developed or redeveloped, the developer builds a good quality sidewalk as part of that. So there are a lot of ways that development does improve the built environment. So I think it's important that continues, and that that's a really critical way that we get better infrastructure.
I was thinking about the school that I work at. One of the schools that I work at is in a neighborhood, and it drives me bananas at how many cars there are. And when you look at our population and how many live within, 1/10 of a mile, And then you've got over 500 cars in the car rider line as I was sitting at it this afternoon. And I'm thinking, there has to be a better way. And the sidewalk like stops at the top where it very easily could have gone on down, and then it stops for the middle school. So I was just sitting here thinking about how neat it would be to do that type of audit if our kids could spearhead that. Even the kids could ride bikes to school at the middle school pretty easily. Like that, just like I'm already thinking about how we can do that in our school.
That would be really cool. And anytime that kids do observations and collect data and present it to elected officials, everybody pays a lot more attention than when adults present it. And what you're talking about with the sidewalks that just kind of end, that to me raises the importance of having complete networks for walking and biking. If you've got 99% of the network built with great bike lanes and sidewalks, but there's one really dangerous intersection, you're not going to let your kid walk or bike to school. So a network literally has to be completely safe along the entire length of it. And so that's why it's important that we plan communities, including that coordination of how do we get between school and home. We need to be asking those questions and planning that in an intentional way, because otherwise we get this kind of piecemeal. We've got a neighborhood over here, we've got a school over here, and we've got this dangerous highway between them with no way to get kids safely to and from. Or even just a neighborhood street that people speed along and there's no traffic calming or anything.
Well, Meg, thank you so much for being with us tonight. That was absolutely fascinating. I was telling some of my friends, I was like, if y'all can't make it tonight, we're recording it and I'm going to send it to you because I think you need to watch it. So I just appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit about Sustain Charlotte and the impact of growth. As seems like Charlotte keeps going farther and farther out. I know I live in Harrisburg, and so we are feeling the growth, but just thinking about the transit system, how nice it would be if it kind of came out that way, you know, a little bit easier for the folks driving into Charlotte. But thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with y'all and answering some questions. And Serena, I'll put my email in the chat so you can email me to claim your Biketoberfest tickets once we get those up for sale. So thank you all again.
Yes.
And thank you for everything that you do to support wildlife.
Thank you.